Stay tuned for Wrestling with Computers, the show where we show you how to use your technology to its fullest potential. So go get yourself a pencil and a piece of paper, because you're going to want to take notes. We're off to the world of technology. Welcome to Wrestling with Computers. I'm Wrestling Brewster from Brewster PC Solutions, and today we've got special guest Michael McLaughlin from Core Computers, here to talk about apples compared to oranges. Welcome, Michael, and thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me today.
Today we're going to talk about Apple computers, Macintosh and Apple computers compared to Microsoft Windows computers. They're two different operating systems. They've been competing in the market for a long time. First, let's talk a little bit about you, what your Apple background is, and a little bit about Core Computers.
I've been a Apple user for about 14 years now. Started in college with a photo background and started using them then as a tool and got really interested in them. And then I started to sell them and work on them and had various positions, IT management, and then got into more of the service side. So I'm a certified Apple technical coordinator and certified technician, and did that for a while as well as consulting, and then worked my way through opening up a retail store.
And you've got one store in Orleans and one right here in Plymouth.
That's correct.
Great, great. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between Apple's and the Windows operating system. Just from a graphical standpoint, I know that technically Windows stole the graphical user interface from Apple a long time ago.
That's what a lot of people say, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, they both have an interface with a mouse, and for me, it's the main difference is the intuitiveness of finding things. Mm-hmm. There's multiple ways to do the same thing, and you're not just tied to, let's say, just the right click. And it's a little more forgiving the deeper you go. But basically, you know, a computer, they all have, you know, something to look at, files and folders, and the similar analogies.
And but it's when it gets down to its core use, the Unix operating system is what kind of differs between the two systems.
Right, right. So once you get under the hood, the Mac OS is based on Unix, which has been around since around the 50s. So it's a very secure, mature, stable platform. And that also lends itself to having that security that a lot of people talk about when having a Mac. It's a true multi-user system, being that you don't have access to the system without special permission or privileges.
So basically, for example, in the Windows operating system, Joe user can usually get in and cause problems as well as fix things or move things around, whereas in the Unix environment, it's a little more difficult to do that.
Yeah, you have to set up what's called a root or super user account, which is not enabled by default, which is a security feature.
Right, it's kind of like the admin account as opposed to the user account in Windows.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Would be, but it's
you're an admin, but there's even one more layer.
One more step.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, a lot of people are talking about one of the reasons to get a Mac is the virus situation.
Right, right.
The viruses that are out there are attacking right and left, and if you don't have any security, you're going to get it.
Right.
What keeps viruses from getting into a Mac as opposed to a Windows machine?
Sure. There's several philosophies and thoughts on this. One, you have to take the consideration that the core or infrastructure of the Mac system is different than Windows. So we can take all these Windows viruses and we'll say they're written in a language, like French or German. They're different. So these viruses are written in the language of Windows. So when the virus, your traditional one, would go to a Mac, the Mac looks at it and says, I don't know what this is. So it's not going to do anything. So you have that protecting you from the Windows viruses. Then you have the fact that you can't get into the main part of the system. Your traditional virus that is more unattended, you get online and stuff just starts happening and deleting stuff isn't really going to happen. No system is going to prevent everything. We get into things like Trojan horses where you're an actual active participant in that invasion to your computer. Whether you understand what's going on or not, you're still allowing it to happen.
Right.
So nothing's going to prevent that.
Yeah, because we talk a lot about, I talk a lot with my clients about how nothing's going to stop what you let in. If you let it in, it's coming in. If you click on something you're not supposed to click on, whether it be a download or an attachment on an email, you're still going to get that virus, even though you can have all the firewalls and antivirus on there. So potentially the Macs could get a virus, could get a Trojan.
Yeah, I think as time goes on, the hackers and people who want to do harm to your machine or exploit things, they're gonna spend more time and get a little more sophisticated. So it'd be foolish to say never or can't.
Yep.
But we're still in a very good position today.
Yep. So talk a little bit, if you can, about these smartphones and the potential for them to get viruses or hacked into. I think that's one of our major security breaches that we're going down that road, that market share of everybody's got one. So
right.
It's going to be something that those hackers are going to start looking at.
Right. So your smartphone basically is a computer.
Right.
So we have to consider, what are we doing on it? It's not just a phone. So when you look at the smartphones that are out there, you have to look, similar to like a Mac or a PC, is what's the core system, how is it built,
Yep.
what are the safeguards that are already in place. So if you take a look at like the iOS, which Apple uses for the iPhone and
Yep.
iPads versus the Android, Apple is very controlling, and a lot of people don't like that.
Right.
But at the same time, that control helps prevent a lot of security risks, that applications are vetted before they're allowed to
Right.
go on your device. Whereas like the Android, it's much more of an open market, which would make it a lot more easier to hack and get into that device. So like with anything that you use with technology or anything in life, you just, you got to be prudent about what you're doing and just be aware. You want to pay attention.
And that's something you mentioned, the whole active participation.
Right.
And that's something that whether you're a Mac user or a Windows user, you really have to notice what's going on. I talk a lot to my clients about, you've got to know what your antivirus is.
Right.
So when something pops up and says you've got a virus, and it doesn't say Norton and it doesn't say McAfee and it's something else, you got to know that.
Exactly.
You also mentioned you got to know, basically, you and I need to know what's under the hood.
Right, right.
But the Joe user really should know what's going on, driving a car. You're going to know how to drive that car. You don't have to,
That's right.
to fix the manifold or fix anything in the insides, but you got to know how to drive it. You're going to know the rules of the road and
Right.
how things go. I think that's really important on any platform.
Yeah, you kind of, just think of it as a tool, not as this, thing that you have no idea what it is. It's there to perform a function for you. And you should understand what that result needs to be.
Yeah.
And by understanding that result or what you want to achieve, it helps you become more aware of your device. And like you said, you don't need to know how the device did it. You just need to know that it can do it. So when things go wrong, you look to a technician who is interested in those type of things and can help resolve those issues.
Well, that's good. But in this day and age, there's a lot of offices who have both a Mac and a Windows PC.
Absolutely.
What about working with Windows programs on a Mac?
Mm-hmm. So, there's that question we get a lot. of, I'm migrating or we want to introduce something, and a lot of people just don't know what's going on today, and it may seem a little silly for us because we've been doing it so long, but basically let's start with email. Email is pretty standard. Everybody has that. Pictures, these are all standard things. And we get into things like Microsoft Office, which would include your basic Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Right. So that program is written in the language of Windows and the language of Mac. So basically you have a file that can be transported between the two. The Mac is a very interesting platform in the sense that, let's say you had an application that was only written in Windows. And so I want to get a Mac, but I have to run this program. I don't want two computers. How do we deal with this? So the Mac allows us to virtualize or run natively Windows. So we can actually install whatever applications you want. So from a platform point of view, it's really nice. We can introduce...
So you can run the dual platform.
Yeah, we can run them at the same time. You can boot into Mac or boot into Windows. So ultimately, for running applications, it can do both. So that's really nice. And then as far as networking goes, networking is based on standards. So, an Ethernet network, a wireless network, as long as everything's set up properly at the router and everything, it's going to plug right in. And the Mac uses the same protocols that Windows does.
Like IPs and...
Yeah, dynamic IPs or put static IPs in, and just like any of your devices on your network, if you have sharing turned on and you know the username and password, then you can connect to that device.
But what about talking in between? Like if you have a Mac and a Windows PC on a network, and you want to be able to transfer files or look at files on one from the other,
right,
or interwork with each other, cross-platform. Like
sure. Just like you would on Windows, if you're at your PC and you have a shared documents folder, the Mac can see that on the network. And on the Mac side, you can simply enable sharing, and there's an option to enable Windows file sharing with a username and password. So both machines would show up on the network pretty much equally.
So, you said you've been using a Mac for about 17 years. A lot of my clients will get a Mac, and that learning curve is when they first are introduced to it, the learning curve is kind of tough because anybody getting into something new that they've been using, especially for the older generation that they've been using Windows for, they weren't born with their keyboard in their hands like we were, so they've been using Windows, and then they go to the Mac, and it's that learning curve's a little bit hard for them. It's just different because you're not using that left click and you're not using the right click, and your things are in a different spot.
Sure, absolutely. So how we try to address that with customers is we try to use real-world analogies so that people have a understanding. So one of the things that we say is, have you ever moved houses? And the answer is usually yes. And it's like, well, did it take you a while to figure out in the middle of the night when you had to go to the bathroom and get a drink of water where everything was? Yeah, okay. So, you have to invest a little bit of time to,
active participant.
Yeah, be an active participant in your technology to figure out where things are. The other thing that we do, we use this really, the KISS theory kind of idea is we'll take an object that's usually nearby and we'll say, this is a pin, and I want to move this pin 2 inches to the left. What do I do? People kind of think about it for a second because it seems oversimplified, and that's how we try to, have people look at the Mac is don't overthink it.
Right.
It's about doing. So if I want to move this, I just pick it up and move it. And a lot of the things are built that way on the Mac platform is just pick it up and move it.
Right. So it's a little more intuitive, and it's again, if you look at the Windows 7 platform, I don't know if you played around with it, but it's going towards that. It's again stealing something from Apple that Apple's kind of taken. But a lot of clients, their problem is that it is new. Right. And I know from experience, people going from XP operating system to Windows 7 operating system, they've got a tough time because Microsoft in their infinite wisdom changed everything and put it, more GUI, so you've got that graphical user interface, and it's hard for people to see that change, and I know a lot of Apple clients who swear by it because if they've learned from the beginning, it is more intuitive.
Right.
You can see where it's like, oh, you want to move something, just move it.
Exactly.
Where, Microsoft, well, if you'd like to move it, you've got to call somebody in Cleveland who will tell you that
It's like with anything, you have to think of it as, you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay.
Yep.
It's easy to ask me how easy something is, but I've been doing it for a long time, so it is easy for me to do. So, you have to take the time to learn it. And also try to think about kind of some of the process, but not the steps of understanding things, so that, word processing is word processing. So it shouldn't matter what program you're in if you understand how to type. And that's where I think people get lost, because they get lost in the sense that they go 4 inches up, 1 inch to the right, click. They memorize placement, not what they're doing. And I think if you can get beyond that, any transition is going to be much easier to do.
Yeah. Well, if you look at technology in general, from where it used to be, when we were in DOS and you had to read this, book about this big, and then to be completely honest, my first computer was a Mac, and I remember plugging it in and turning it on.
Right.
And my mother was like, "That's it? You don't have to, sacrifice a chicken." And
It was that easy, right?
But technology is just leaps and bounds. It keeps changing every year. You look at the iPhone and the iPad. I think that the innovations that both companies, Microsoft and Apple, have, but the wave of the future that's coming, that you can use this. You have this personal computer as your phone. A lot of kids will look at old phones and say, what else does it do?
Right.
And it's kind of scary in one sense, but it's the technology. If you look at old episodes of Star Trek, when they used to have their whole manifest on what looked like an iPad.
Sure, absolutely.
And talk a little bit about